Well, good afternoon and welcome to Round the Table, live with Christian Concern this afternoon. It's great to see you, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube. Today we're going to be talking about two quite important cases that have come out this week. One is the case of Christy Higgs, a school assistant who was dismissed for posting petition on Facebook. Extraordinary case. It's real implications for free speech and things. And that was in the Employment Tribunal a couple of weeks ago, and the judgment came out this week, and we'll talk all about that. And then also we've got Mike Over, the street preacher, and the judgment on that one also came out today. And here with me today, we've got Andrea Williams, Chief Executive of Christian Concern, and also Michael Phillips, top legal eagle from the Christian Legal Centre. Very familiar, particularly with these cases, but also particularly with Mike Over. Great to see you guys. How are you doing?
Great, thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
And indeed, as you were opening up there, Tim, I was just rereading the judgment of in Christie's case that I've got here. Let's bear in mind she posted on Facebook these posts that were concerned about books that her children in primary school, one of her children in primary school, was going to be reading, and it was, the red crayon becomes a blue crayon. There was a commentary on this promotion of transgenderism and the normalizing it in the schools. She posted it in a private Facebook account. Now, we all know when we post on Facebook that it can go beyond that, but one of the points that she continually made when she was given evidence was, well, I just thought this would be of interest to my friends and family that might not know about it, and they would be free to share it or not. I mean, it was a choice beyond that.
So it was only visible to her friends.
It was only visible to her friends.
And it was her maiden name as well, under her maiden name.
That's it. And what's also interesting is that the person that complained has gone deep into the body of the links that she had shared. So they had read every last word, they'd read the blogs that were attached to it and taken issue, not with what was on the surface.
This is an anonymous complaint, Andrea, an anonymous person amongst her Facebook friends.
Yes.
Said to the school that she works, which is a different school to the one that she was complaining about.
That's right, yes.
That she thought these comments might be offensive to somebody. And the school said, do some more digging. Go and do some offence archaeology. Find something. There must be something there we can find that's properly offensive. Can you go and find it? And so she went and did some digging.
Can you imagine that the headmaster of the school, the secondary school, said to the complainant, who remained anonymous throughout, so Christy did not know who complained against her, go and look back at her Facebook group and see if she's posted anything else like this.
Yeah.
And she came back. There really wasn't anything more, but there was commentary on the kind of books that all our children are currently being exposed to in our primary schools, which are very concerning, which are normalizing all manner of relationships, all kinds of really sort of the early sexualization of our children, also this confusion around gender. But let's look at the judgment.
Do you want to show a video of Christy first?
Oh, sure. Let's do that. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got a short video.
My name is Christy Higgs, and over a year ago, I was dismissed from my job for sharing information on my Facebook page, my private Facebook page, about a petition, a government consultation to make sex education and relationships education mandatory in schools. It was okay to share that information because this is made compulsory now in the schools. I may have known about this a year ago, but parents are waking up now. They're finding out the truth of what's really being taught in these schools. I do have my concerns. Because we should be able to share biblical truth. And sharing information and not being allowed to do that and to be silenced, to not be able to share this information with our family and friends is absurd. And as parents, we should have the right to share our concerns so other people can be aware and they can also judge it for themselves. My trial is coming up So yes, so I have to go in there and tell the truth and share my concerns and the reasons why I did it. And I'm hoping for a positive outcome. And I would be grateful for your prayers for a time such as this, because I need other parents and other people to stand with me. But please also pray for my family, because the messages I've already received and the prayers I've already had has made us all stronger, and also it helps us fight the good fight of the faith, as 1 Timothy says in 6:12. And it's true. We do need your prayers, and the children need your prayers.
Great. So there's there, and you just want to comment on the judgment fee there that came out this week on Christie. You've read it today, I think.
Yes, I mean, just at paragraph 63, it says this: we concluded that not only the dismissal, but the entire proceedings taken against Mrs. Higgs were motivated by a concern on a part of the school that by reason of the posts, she would be perceived as holding unacceptable views in relation to gay and trans views, which in fact she vehemently denied that she did hold. In short, the action was not on the ground of the beliefs, but rather a completely different reason, namely that the result of her actions, she might be perceived as holding beliefs that would not qualify for protection under the Equality Act. So she was disciplined and came under sanction of gross misconduct, lost her job because of the way in which her views were perceived by others, and which the tribunal, which Judge Reed himself said in this judgment.
But it's not even that, is it? It's the way in which her views might be perceived by some imaginary person, isn't it? Yeah.
There was one complainant. There was one complainant that received the views as this, and the judge was concerned. He knew that complainant had received them as such, but the school acted because of the way in which they might be perceived. The headmaster had asked for the complainant to do some more digging. Nothing much came up. Nothing came up. In fact, they acknowledged that Christie loved, and this is actually in the judgment, that there was no hate, and yet for the way in which those views might be received, it was she was not discriminated against. Mike, I don't know, as someone who's done a lot of these cases, and indeed you're in Makareth, weren't you? I mean, this judgment is good for the case of David Makareth, the doctor, who was suddenly lost his job for refusing to, in a medical examination, to say that a man was a woman or a woman was a man on the medical records. There, the tribunal, and this one's currently under appeal, held that belief was not worthy of respect in a democratic society. This judgment, and we thank God for this, this judgment has overturned that, so that's progress. Well, I say overturned, it stands in parallel. They now need to be taken up within the appeals.
Challenged it, questioned it. Yeah.
They did this judgment, this judge said explicitly that he did not agree with that, which is good news for us as we take this up the appeals process. You know that the reason why Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre, the reason why we are passionate about these cases and take these cases is because this truth is so important. This Genesis 1 truth is so important, and that our freedom to express this is so important. So, Mike, you were certainly very involved. You were the advocate in the David Makareth case, but just generally to comment in relation to the Christie Higgs case.
I think the thing is this, is that the seeds have been sown many, many years ago for what we're beginning to see now. And so there are competing human rights, which there is no real harmony between them. So somebody's expression or right to express what they believe, and somebody's right to freedom of religion, along with rights associated with transgenderism and homosexuality are on a collision course, and the courts have got the honor of having to try to decide between them which rights trump which rights, and they will always say that no, there is no hierarchy of rights. But I think what has been seen repeatedly is that there is a hierarchy of rights, and there are certain rights which are respected more than others, and it's almost as though we're moving towards a right not to be offended. So the case law over the years has always said that there is no right not to be offended. That is the very essence of freedom of speech. The freedom to be able to say only that which is inoffensive is no freedom at all. And that was a very famous line about 20 or so years ago. And so we have to have this ability to keep on saying things which other people find offensive. And that goes both ways. That applies, if a Christian wants to say to a Muslim, what you believe is not true, likewise, a Muslim has the same right. And it applies in relation to homosexual issues. Now, Christians will want to say that this is not a good thing. And likewise, homosexuals may well want to say, well, Christianity, I don't agree with it. And we've
So Michael, let me ask you a question here. Christina Spivey on Facebook. Hi, Christina. She's asked this question. What are our rights as an individual posting on Facebook, social media, without any litigation against us from our employer? So where do we stand on this? Can we, what's the law say about posting something on social media and whether the employer could get or should get upset at all?
Well, it is complicated. I'm afraid to say that there's no one sentence answer to that question. If you want to be absolutely certain that you're not going to have anything happen to you, then really you can't post anything at all. But really, the law does permit us outside of a work context in order to express our views, even in a social media context. And so that is the right that person has, and that is a right that person should be able to uphold in law. And as obviously everybody on this call knows, there was an important decision about last year involving the case of Phillips and Agole, where Felix was in a very similar situation where he expressed his views on same-sex marriage. He got into a lot of trouble about that with his university.
Social worker from Sheffield, just as a reminder of the case for everyone.
Yeah, so there was a student social worker, and eventually, having lost first time in court, eventually the Court of Appeal agreed that there is that right to express one's views on traditional marriage, sexuality, and so on. But the thing is, you've just got to be very careful about how you express these things, really. And I'm sure that most people are. But as soon as you overstep the mark, as far as they're concerned, in terms of your language and so on, then they are looking for an opportunity to jump down your throat. But probably one of the safest things to do is just maybe quote biblical texts and say, this is what I believe. And that's probably a safe way to go for anybody in employment.
Well, I think that what Mike is saying is fantastic advice, and we would hope that it was so. There is a reality, isn't there, Mike, that Felix was in fact quoting from biblical texts and explaining things from biblical texts, and still got into trouble. There is a reality that this whole culture means that people are very subdued, this kind of chilling factor, which means people are scared to express viewpoints on social media culture. They feel that they have to conform to the sort of prevailing political orthodoxy. I was in a discussion last night with a number of sort of early young people who are in their 20s, and it was fascinating because they were all saying they did not feel free to express their faith on social media, or they could express their love for God, but to express their viewpoint on any human sexuality issues, for instance, or political viewpoints, they were really concerned about it because of what might happen to them. And they felt that there were a lot of people out there that felt the same way. And this is why there's a sense in which we have to find our voice. And I think what Michael said about making the Bible known is really important here. And Christy's case is important because, this was very small. What she was doing was sharing to just a relatively small group of friends and family a concern and linking to articles. It just really wasn't a big deal at all. and you found yourself in trouble with in this way. I want to encourage everyone out there to be bold and to be brave. And I feel like the more of us that there are mainstreaming these mainstream views, mainstreaming mainstreaming purity, mainstreaming love of God, mainstreaming marriage, mainstreaming sexual purity, because that's what at the end this is about. It's sexual purity. When we really speak and mainstream these things for the good, for the common good, and keep on doing, how many cases are they going to bring? We'll be there to fight them on, but how many cases are they going to bring?
But this is just round one, isn't it, Michael?
Yeah.
You know, it's we don't comment on the judgment, and we're going to appeal it, and how you think it's going to go.
Yeah, I think the thing is this: is that the common culture permeates everywhere, including the judiciary, including lawyers, and so on, and people start believing this cultural norm that to offend other people is in fact illegal. And we see this with police officers as well. So what's going to happen from here is this: is that we're going to lodge an appeal, and it will go up to the next level of judges, and hopefully we'll see some sense there. But if you lose, then you go to the Court of Appeal, and ultimately you can go to the Supreme Court and to the European Court of Human Rights. And you've got to keep on pushing, because sometimes there are many famous cases, that some of which we've been involved in, other cases other people have been involved in, where the clients have lost and lost and lost. And people will often say, well, why are you doing this? You keep on losing and so on. And then when you get to the final stage, Supreme Court, the European Court of Human Rights, you win there. And so that's the only one that actually counts at the end. And so really one has to say, well, look, in good conscience, what does your instinct tell you? And this just does not seem right. It does not seem right that somebody who was expressing orthodox views about marriage and sexuality should lose her job in these situations and circumstances. And you've just got to hope and pray that as you go up the various levels of judiciary and court stages, then eventually you get to a stage where a judge says, no, you're right, actually, we agree.
And Christ's known within that culture, within the judicial culture, and to use the tools, the God-given tools of state, to challenge things that are unjust for the good of culture, and also for the good of human salvation, for the good of human souls, to point to God's path, God's laws, God's way, to expose where laws are being badly used, where those that are good are those that are virtuous, those that are good employees are being taken out because of an unjust application of rules. That's a really important thing to do. And there's a sense in which if we lose in terms of the world's tools at that point, because we stand, we witness. And I say that Christy is a brave and courageous winner. And she would say, I'm shy, I can't find my words. She was quietly working as an assistant in a school, looking after children that were quite often pushed out of their classrooms with disruptive behaviour. She was loved by those children. She gets embraced by those children in her local town. She's a beauty. She's a quiet, beautiful, unassuming Christian who's found herself in this storm just because she stood for what she believed in, just because she stood for truth.
Yeah.
And I know that there are many people out there watching and listening who honour and love Christy, but are just like that.
Yeah.
And that's why we exist here at the Christian Legal Centre, because we stand with you to speak this truth, to keep on speaking this truth into society.
Yeah. So, but Michael, isn't freedom of speech protected in law? I mean, you've already cited some examples there. And you've also got the European Court of Human Rights, and judges have said clearly, if you've got freedom of speech, you must include the right to offend. I mean, that must be the case, isn't it? A strong protection in law, freedom of speech?
It's extremely strong, but the problem is this: is that what you often find is on the ground with police officers and judges and prosecutors and so on, how they actually interpret that. So they will always say you've got the freedom to believe that, or whatever it is. So for example, if there's a street preacher on the street and he says that people are going to be going to hell if they don't accept Christ as their savior, they'll say you're free to believe that. That's fine. You're free, in fact, to preach it in a certain way. But if you cross the line, if, for example, you point a finger or you raise your voice, and at that point, you have crossed the line, and therefore that is not covered. And you are therefore breaking the law, and we can arrest you, we can prosecute you, we can take you to the station, and then eventually end up with a criminal conviction. So that's the way they get around these situations.
But Michael, you've got a fantastic track record on exactly these cases, isn't it? The street preacher cases, and one this week as well. I don't think any of our street preacher cases have actually resulted in a conviction, have they? Is that right?
Well, the answer is that at the moment we are grateful that every case that we've been involved in and taken to its final conclusion has eventually resulted in an acquittal, which is good. And obviously there are many judges out there who appreciate the points that we make and agree with freedom of speech and so on. But occasionally you do come across prosecutors and judges and so on who just do not really fully understand it. And so there's almost like there's a visceral element to it where they say, no, in these circumstances, we're not going to allow it because of, and they will always find something particular to that individual or that particular set of circumstances. And they'll say, no, it's far too far. But what they're really doing is that they're seeking to really prohibit the message. That's the effect of it. And, the sad thing is that, our present leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, was involved in some of these cases beforehand, and, but recently he, for example, he voted for buffer zones in Parliament. So this just shows you sometimes how, on the one hand, when people are in a certain context in private practice as a barrister.
Explain what buffer zones are, Michael, because not everyone might know.
So buffer zones are when an area is designated by a local council as being there's a need to protect people in that particular area. So usually it's an abortion zone, an abortion clinic, and outside for example, 300 yards around the clinic, there's no protest allowed, no kind of witness of any description. And 10 years ago, none existed. Now there's maybe one or two in the country, and they're asking for more and more. So it's just these little encroachments into freedom of speech, where people say, no, freedom of speech is fine and good, but not in this situation, not in those circumstances. And then before you know it, we're heading towards a totalitarian regime. And that's the worrying thing for not just Christians. There are other organizations out there which are fighting these kinds of cases.
And Andrea, you were in court this week with Mike Overd, weren't you? Tell us about that case.
Yes, and indeed, Mike was there too. Well, Mike Overd has been out on the streets. He's got an extraordinary testimony over many years now, being radically saved. He talks of being a violent, drunken man, where he really encountered the Lord Jesus Christ. And he's passionate about getting onto the streets. And I've often been with Mike and seen the heart of that man, to see men and women come to the Lord Jesus Christ. And Mike, I don't know if you want to explain the circumstances around the injunction that they thought to bring around Mike Overd, and actually how that was resolved earlier this week.
Yeah, so Mike Overd is somebody who's been preaching for the last 10 or so years in Taunton and that kind of area. Some people really don't like him and he started preaching. Some people really do. But that's not really the point. The point is that even the most caustic preachers, although not saying that that's him at all, they need that freedom in order to continue to go out. Not just Mike, but there are other people like that. And so he's been going out every single week, and he's been had many people who've come up to him, complimented him, said that thank you very much for what you're doing. But there have been a number of prosecutions against him, all of which have been either dropped or resulted in an acquittal, about 5. And so we thought that was it, but it wasn't. So what happened was that they asked for an injunction, and it was about 6 prohibitions that they were seeking, about not to preach for more than 20 minutes.
That's like clinic, wasn't he? This particular time that they were seeking.
Well, it was he. In fact, there were a number of different locations that they were seeking to. It was part of the injunction application was in relation to abortion clinics. But in fact, there are other matters as well. Just the town centre, they wanted to limit his freedom of speech wherever he went in the county. So it wasn't just what he did outside the abortion clinic. And what happened was in the end, they dropped all of their requests, aside from really just the amplification, and that was it. There's also another demand that he not say anybody is a murderer outside an abortion clinic, which he said he never did anyway. But the main one was that he wasn't to use amplification. But otherwise, the judge recognised, and the police and their barrister recognised that he did have that freedom, the freedom to continue to preach the message of the gospel. All aspects of it, not just those bits which we all like to hear, but also those bits which are more difficult to hear as well.
Mm. Mm. And what would your advice be to street preachers out there at the moment, Michael?
Yeah, what I would say to anyone who's going out on the streets is, first of all, record yourself.
Right.
There is nothing which makes that illegal, so preferably a body-worn camera on your chest, or at the very least, just turn on your mobile phone and record what you are saying, because there are so many people who just simply make things up. And so if you've got a recording of what you've said, then instantly the charge goes away. Secondly, take somebody with you, preferably. And thirdly, really just try to keep to the biblical text. If you're going to be talking about something which is controversial, if you say things about, God's forgiveness, God's love, and so on, it's very unlikely in those circumstances that anybody's going to get you into trouble. But as soon as you mention homosexuality, Islam, transgenderism, abortion, those 4 or 5 hot potatoes, then at that point, it's almost inevitable that somebody's going to ring up the police and say that I'm offended, please come down here, please arrest this person. Some police officers know their staff, they won't do it, but others don't. And so that's the situation that you might find yourself in.
Can I really reiterate Mike's point of the need for the accurate record? Because the truth is that we've had an extraordinarily successful run on these cases because we've had an accurate record, because we've had police recordings, body camera recordings. It is almost inevitable that if we don't have a recording, if we don't have sufficient evidence that shows what was actually said, the accusations that are being made and how people are offended, and probably a distortion of what was said in relation to homosexuality or abortion or Islam, a distortion, not an accurate version that will be reported by the person that's accusing, will be the one that's believed, will be the one that's used as a finding of fact. So can I really please reiterate that, because that's what's helped us to ensure that the right record of facts is on the record, because always the preacher's version is the true version, backed up by the video record.
And Michael, tell us, what is the importance of street preaching? Not everyone wants to do it. Not everyone responds well to it. Just tell us, why is it important?
I think probably the people that are best able to tell you that is if you were to go onto YouTube and type in converted under street preaching, you would find a raft of testimonies of people who say or would say that, I was a drunkard, fornicator, violent. And as a result of hearing the message on the street, which, because I'm not on the internet, didn't hear it on the internet, didn't hear it through my friends, not interested in going to church, but I did hear something on the street. And, a good example is Mike Overt, but another chap that we're representing at the moment in Swindon was just that. He has the most incredible testimony.
Yes.
I was walking around with him in Swindon town centre the other day, and he was taking me to the place that he would sleep. He slept rough. He injected heroin. That he basically he acted as a pimp for prostitutes. It was extraordinary. And as we were walking around, he was being greeted by these people who he had dealings with over the years. Former addicts, other women that he'd exploited. And he said, look, it all started with this guy who would preach regularly in the town centre, and I would go down there and I would go up to him, I would shout at him, I'd confront him, I would swear at him. Sometimes I took his Bible, I'd rip it up. But eventually something just hit me, and over a period of years he gradually began to realize who he was and became a Christian. And now he himself is married, he's got children, he works, he's not homeless anymore, and he himself is a preacher. So That's just one testimony amongst probably thousands of other people in that
What's so
situation.
beautiful about him, Mike, I remember when he came into the office, he came with 2 sleeping bags on his back to give to the homeless out on the streets, because he was going to go out after coming to meet us. He was going to go out, get back out on the street, give his sleeping bags away. It was an absolute beauty. Can I say, as well as that, because it's true that people are converted. There's something, sometimes, you know, I've been humbled by these street preachers, because there's this big thing in churches generally and in how to do things really well, what the package looks like, how we're going to be most effective, and of course, it's good. These things are good. I'm not saying they're bad, but the raw gospel. And once, when I heard Mike Overd give the gospel to the appeal court judge in the Crown Court on one of his cases, my heart, my soul was stirred in the courtroom. There was power in that message that day in the courtroom. For me, it was palpable, absolutely palpable. And, you know, all those kind of books on how to do evangelism, the neat ways of doing it were kind of like out of the window. There it was, just this straight proclamation of the gospel in the court. But, you know, it's also important not just that street preachers stay on the street. Once those are closed down, who's going to come? What will happen next? You know, Christy posted on Facebook. Next is going to be those online sermons that say things around on issues of human sexuality, on issues of marriage. It's going to be those things that are taken out next. It's going to be those preachers that get prosecuted next, or are told that they shouldn't. That shouldn't be something that's put out within the system. It will be removed. So remember, it's all a line.
Yeah, well, it's a very important issue, and well done, Michael, for your fantastic track record there with street preachers. Your light went off there, and we pray and hope that we continue with that track record. It's fantastic, and it's so important to protect these street preachers and their rights of freedom of speech. And we keep praying for Christy. And I think that I'm confident that that'll get turned over. Actually, I read the judgment and I thought, gosh, you know, this judgment doesn't stack up. I think we'll definitely take it up from there. So I wanted to just preview. We're launching a book next week on Monday night, 6 p.m. Clifford Hill, very well known and very experienced minister with a very impressive track record, has written a new book. He's written several other books before. He's written a new book. It's called Beyond the Pandemic. Got a copy here. And it's really very interesting, perceptive view on what's happening around the world and why God is allowing this pandemic. And we've got a little short video clip of him just talking about that, but which I'll play just now. But we've got a live interview with him about it and Q&A, which you can plug into on Facebook and YouTube on Monday night at 6 p.m.
Tim, can I just put in there? Can I just put in there to say,
yeah,
Clifford Hill is into his 9th decade.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah,
it's absolutely extraordinary. A man and his wife Monica, who have done ministry together now for tens of decades. 50 or 60 years, 60 years maybe 70 years maybe.
Yeah.
And he is an academic. He's an academic. He's also a preacher teacher. But he lives the times. He understands the times. So it's important that we listen to what he has to say. And this energy and insightfulness at beyond 90 years of age, and to write a book, we should all take note. I think just listen to what it is that he has to say. And I think before we go into that, can I also say that just as we finish off around Christy and Mike, do write them messages of support. You know, Mike has a bad back. It hurts. You know, say, well done, Mike. Thanks for standing. And for Christy, say, we're standing with you. You know, just because it means such a lot. Because these people, they become names in the space, but they're flesh and blood. If you're watching through them with a cup of coffee, well, they are too, kind of thing, just like you. So do show them, your support. But yes, Tim, Clifford Hill and this book, it's going to be good on Monday.
Yeah, let's. There's a link there to send Christy a message, and let's watch the video of Clifford Hill just talking briefly about his book.
Living in these unprecedented times when all the nations are being shaken, are we actually seeing the beginnings of the birth pains that Jesus predicted to his disciples? In Beyond the Pandemic, we attempt to answer the question, is there any word from the Lord? 2020 has been a year when God is shaking everything, as predicted in scripture. And the book really was inspired by the national lockdown. I was really quite disturbed when the churches were all closed, because I felt that if ever there was a time when the churches were needed to be opened and to be declaring the word of the Lord, it was during the pandemic. What I wanted was to hear something from church leaders saying why God was allowing this to happen, and was there a word from the Lord to explain to the nation what was happening. And so when the churches closed, it just seemed to me that a great opportunity was being lost. I'll just read you a little bit of what God is saying to the church today. The great question confronting us today is, do we know what following Jesus means in the 21st century world? Are we prepared to lay down our church structures at the foot of the cross and ask Jesus to rebuild his church that has become marriage to the world? You cannot put new wine into old wineskins any more than you can put new life into the old structures of the church. What I've tried to do in the book really is to look at the things that God has done in the past, because that helps us to have confidence in God being in control today, and to understand what he's actually doing and saying to us. Because if we understand what God is doing, it takes away fear. And that's what I'm hoping this book will do. This book will help people to understand the purposes of God and what he is doing through this pandemic.
Great. Well, we'll be having a live interview and discussion with him on Monday nights, 6 p.m. Right here, where you are now, YouTube, Facebook. So join us for that, and we'll be posing him questions and talking about what's happening there. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Michael, as well. I hope you enjoyed it. Do send a message to Christy and just thank her for her stance. Just encourage her. She'll be so blessed to know that people out there really appreciate the stance that she's done. And I'll see you on Monday night at 6 p.m. and next week here around the table at the same time as well. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.